Typhoon Kalmaegi, one of the most powerful storms to strike Southeast Asia in recent years, made landfall in central Vietnam on the evening of November 6, 2025, unleashing destructive winds, torrential rains, and widespread flooding. The storm arrived after carving a deadly path through the Philippines, where it claimed at least 193 lives. Kalmaegi slammed into Vietnam's Gia Lai province with sustained winds reaching 149 kilometers per hour, 92.5 miles per hour, and gusts exceeding that, according to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. The Vietnamese National Center for Hydrometeorological Forecasting warned of waves up to 8 meters, 26 feet, and storm surges of nearly 0.6 meters, 2 feet, along coastal areas. The typhoon struck a region already saturated by record-breaking rainfall and flooding that had killed 47 people just days earlier. This compounded the vulnerability of infrastructure and heightened the risk of landslides and flash floods. At least 9 people were confirmed dead in Vietnam due to Kalmaigi's impact, with casualties expected to rise as assessments continue. Thousands of residents were evacuated from low-lying and coastal areas, particularly in Gia Lai, Quang Ngai, and Tuy Hoa provinces. Emergency shelters were activated, and local authorities coordinated rescue operations amid power outages and blocked roads. In Quy Nhon, a coastal city in Gia Lai province, residents recorded dramatic footage of waves crashing onto the beach and trees being uprooted. Entire neighborhoods were inundated, and many homes suffered structural damage. Kalmaegi severely disrupted Vietnam's transportation network. The Hanoi-Ho Chi Minh City railway line suffered extensive damage, particularly between Quang Ngai and Tuy Hoa. Tracks were washed out, embankments collapsed, and signal poles were broken. The most serious damage occurred at kilometer 1136 plus 850 on the Phuc Van Can section, where the track bed was eroded to a depth of 9 meters. Approximately 1,500 passengers were stranded and had to be transferred by road between Tuy Hoa and Du Tri stations. Power cuts disabled communication systems, and repair crews are working around the clock to restore service. Vietnam's Prime Minister ordered all emergency response agencies and ministries to mobilize resources and personnel. The military was deployed to assist with evacuations, debris clearance, and infrastructure repair. The government issued weather advisories and coordinated with international agencies for satellite monitoring and forecasting support. Local governments in affected provinces declared states of emergency and suspended schools and public services. Aid distribution centers were set up to provide food, water, and medical supplies to displaced families. Kalmaigi's heavy rains and storm surge inundated rice paddies, fish farms, and agricultural land across central Vietnam. Early estimates suggest tens of thousands of hectares of crops were damaged, threatening food security and livelihoods in rural communities. The storm also caused coastal erosion and damaged mangrove forests, which serve as natural buffers against typhoons. Environmental agencies are assessing long-term ecological impacts and planning restoration efforts. The economic toll of Kalmaegi is expected to be substantial. Preliminary estimates suggest hundreds of millions of dollars in damages to homes, infrastructure, agriculture, and transportation. Tourism in central Vietnam, especially in coastal cities like Quy Nhon and Tuy Hoa, has been severely affected, with resorts and beaches closed indefinitely. Insurance claims are expected to surge, and local businesses face prolonged disruptions. The government is considering emergency financial aid and tax relief for affected regions. Kalmaigi's devastation in Vietnam follows its deadly rampage through the Philippines, where it killed nearly 200 people and displaced tens of thousands. The storm's rapid intensification and erratic path highlight the growing challenges of climate change and the need for resilient infrastructure and early warning systems. Vietnam's response to Kalmaegi reflects improvements in disaster preparedness, but the scale of damage underscores persistent vulnerabilities. Experts are calling for investment in flood defenses, urban drainage systems, and community-based disaster risk reduction. As Kalmaegi weakens inland, recovery efforts are underway. Power is gradually being restored, and road clearance operations are progressing. Humanitarian organizations are providing relief, and engineers are assessing structural safety in affected areas. The Vietnamese government has pledged to rebuild stronger and more resilient communities. International aid may be sought to support long-term recovery and climate adaptation. Nearly 57 houses and ripped the roofs off an estimated 3,000 more, the news outlet said, while also causing 11 boats to sink and downing power lines across the country. Vietnam's Dak Lak, Quang Ngai, and Gia Lai provinces were some of the hardest hit, Vietnam News said, with the government reporting 5 deaths and 7 injuries as of midday on Friday local time. More than 8,000 people have been evacuated from storm-hit areas while 1.28 million households remain without power, according to Vietnam News. The government said it had mobilized more than 268,000 soldiers for search and rescue operations, while the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi issued a travel advisory, warning that coastal Vietnam could see waves of between 4 to 8 meters, 13 to 26 feet, high and winds of up to 135 kilometers, 84 miles, per hour in some parts of the country. Kalmaegi, the 13th typhoon to form in the South China Sea this year, has now weakened to a tropical storm, according to Vietnam's weather forecaster, as it moves on to nearby Cambodia and Laos. Kalmaegi intensified rapidly as it approached Vietnam's central coast, packing sustained winds of up to 149 kilometers per hour, 92.5 miles per hour, and gusts exceeding 170 kilometers per hour. The Vietnamese National Center for Hydrometeorological Forecasting issued multiple warnings, citing wave heights of up to 8 meters and storm surges nearing 0.6 meters along the coastline. Phu Yen, located directly in the storm's path, experienced the full force of Kalmaegi's landfall. The city of Tuy Hoa was battered by wind gusts that uprooted trees, shattered windows, and tore roofs from buildings. Rainfall totals exceeded 300 millimeters in 24 hours, overwhelming drainage systems and triggering flash floods. Local authorities in Phu Yen evacuated thousands of residents from vulnerable coastal and low-lying areas. Emergency shelters were activated in Tuy Hoa, Song Ca, and Dong Hoa districts. Despite these efforts, at least one fatality was reported in Phu Yen due to a collapsed structure. Power outages affected large portions of the province, with communication lines down in several districts. Rescue teams worked through the night to assist stranded residents, clear debris, and restore access to blocked roads. In anticipation of Kalmaegi's arrival, the Civil Aviation Authority of Vietnam ordered the closure of Tuy Hoa Airport from 3 p.m. on November 6th until midnight. This precautionary measure was part of a broader shutdown of 5 airports across central Vietnam, including Phu Cat, Chu Lai, Pleiku, and Buon Ma Thuột. Road transport was also severely affected. Landslides blocked sections of National Highway 1A, and flooding rendered several rural roads impassable. Train services were suspended between Tuy Hoa and Du Tri, stranding hundreds of passengers. Kalmaegi inflicted significant damage on Phu Yen's infrastructure. In Tuy Hoa, dozens of homes were destroyed or severely damaged, and public buildings such as schools and clinics suffered roof and window damage. Power substations were flooded, and utility poles were toppled by the wind. The province's coastal defenses, including seawalls and breakwaters, were overwhelmed by the storm surge. Fishing ports in Song Kau and Tai Hoa reported dozens of boats sunk or missing, and warehouses storing seafood were inundated. Phu Yen's agricultural sector was hit hard. Thousands of hectares of rice paddies and vegetable farms were submerged, and aquaculture operations suffered extensive losses. Fish cages along the Durang River were swept away, and salt fields in Tai and district were contaminated by floodwaters. Environmental agencies warned of coastal erosion and mangrove damage, which could have long-term ecological consequences. The storm also triggered landslides in mountainous areas, threatening biodiversity and water quality. Vietnam's central government activated emergency protocols, dispatching military units and disaster response teams to Phu Yen. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development sent engineers to assess damage to irrigation systems and coastal defenses. Local authorities distributed food, water, and medical supplies to displaced residents, and mobile clinics were set up to treat injuries and prevent disease outbreaks. Volunteers and youth organizations joined cleanup efforts, removing debris and restoring access to critical infrastructure. The economic toll in Phu Yen is expected to be substantial. Preliminary estimates suggest tens of millions of dollars in damages to homes, agriculture, fisheries, and public infrastructure. Tourism, a growing sector in Tai Hoa, has been severely disrupted, with resorts closed and beaches damaged. Small businesses face prolonged closures, and farmers are calling for government compensation and recovery aid. Insurance claims are expected to surge, and the provincial government is preparing a request for emergency funding. Kalmaigi's impact on Phu Yen is part of a broader pattern of intensifying tropical cyclones in Southeast Asia. Experts point to climate change and warming ocean temperatures as contributing factors to the storm's rapid intensification and erratic path. Vietnam has made strides in disaster preparedness, but Kalmaegi exposed gaps in infrastructure resilience, early warning systems, and community-based risk reduction. Calls are growing for investment in urban drainage, flood defenses, and climate adaptation strategies. As Kalmaegi weakens inland, recovery efforts in Phu Yen are accelerating. Power is being restored, roads are being cleared, and damage assessments are underway. The government has pledged to rebuild stronger and more resilient communities. Meanwhile, floodwaters in Song Kau Ward rose between 1 and 1.5 meters, isolating neighborhoods such as in Bin Dong. Residents were forced to climb onto furniture and rooftops to escape rising waters, awaiting rescue by boat. Emergency services worked overnight to evacuate stranded families, with local authorities deploying military units and rescue teams. At least 4 households were completely cut off, and dozens more were partially submerged. While no fatalities have been confirmed in Daklac as of November 7th, injuries and property losses are mounting. Schools and public offices were closed, and emergency shelters were activated in Buon Ma Thuot and surrounding districts. Kalmaigi's winds and floods wreaked havoc on Daklac's infrastructure. Power poles were toppled, causing extensive blackouts across Song Kau, Ea Kar, and Krong Pak districts. Roads were washed out, and landslides blocked access to remote villages. Public buildings, including clinics and schools, suffered roof damage and water intrusion. Communication lines were disrupted, complicating coordination of rescue and relief efforts. The provincial government reported dozens of homes damaged or destroyed, with many more at risk due to unstable foundations and landslide threats. Dak Lak's economy, heavily reliant on agriculture, has been severely affected. Coffee plantations, a key export crop, were inundated, with early estimates suggesting hundreds of hectares of damage. Livestock losses are also being reported, and fish farms along the Tamjong River were swept away. Environmental agencies are monitoring soil erosion, riverbank collapse, and contamination of water sources. The flooding has disrupted ecosystems and may have long-term consequences for biodiversity and water quality in the region. The Vietnamese government has mobilized emergency resources to assist Dak Lak. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development dispatched engineers to assess damage to irrigation systems and coordinate recovery. Local officials declared a state of emergency and requested national support. Relief supplies, including food, clean water, and medical kits, are being distributed to affected communities. Mobile clinics have been deployed to treat injuries and prevent disease outbreaks. Volunteers and youth organizations are assisting with debris removal and shelter management. The economic toll of the flooding in Daklac is expected to be significant. Preliminary estimates suggest tens of millions of dollars in damages to homes, agriculture, and public infrastructure. Small businesses face prolonged closures, and farmers are calling for compensation and recovery aid. Insurance claims are expected to surge, and the provincial government is preparing a request for emergency funding and international assistance. The disruption to coffee exports may also impact Vietnam's broader economy, as Daklac is one of the country's leading producers. Kalmaegi's impact on Daklac highlights the vulnerability of Vietnam's highland provinces to extreme weather events. Experts point to climate change and deforestation as contributing factors to the severity of flooding and landslides. Calls are growing for investment in resilient infrastructure, early warning systems, and sustainable land management. Dak Lak's experience underscores the need for community-based disaster risk reduction and better coordination between local and national agencies. As floodwaters recede, recovery efforts are accelerating. Power is being restored, roads are being cleared, and damage assessments are underway. The government has pledged to rebuild stronger and more resilient communities, with a focus on climate adaptation and infrastructure reinforcement. Environmental restoration projects are being planned to rehabilitate riverbanks and reforest vulnerable areas. International aid may be sought to support long-term recovery and development.
Nhà đây, nhà mình đây. Đó.